Thank you, Joy. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Dino Saroldo. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Design Preservation League, and we're so happy to welcome you all to the 47th Annual Art Deco Weekend. As you all know, this year's theme, it's a little different than normal years. We're now talking about boats or planes or trains, but it's something a little bigger, which is the legislation that can impact all of us in coastal communities throughout Florida. The timing is very good, and we're so lucky to have so many members of our stakeholders community here, board members, staff, tour guides, and I want to thank all of you for your participation. And also, I want to recognize we have two elected officials. If I'm missing anyone, let me know. We had our Commissioner Tanya Bott. And also today, we have our Commissioner Alex Fernandez, and then Alex is going to come up for some remarks, and then I'll come and introduce the speaker. So please join me in welcoming Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you, Daniel. It really is a pleasure to be with all of you, alongside with my colleague, Commissioner Tanya Bott. Such a wonderful addition to the City Commission to have a true preservationist at heart, serving on the land. I think it speaks to the values of what we hold dear in our community. And this year is so important, the work that Daniel and Miami Design Preservation League is doing in advocating for our historic places. It's been a priority of mine since last year, when the fund was waged against our community, but against historic assets all throughout the state of Florida, to erase our histories in the name of development. And let's just put that in context of what that means. Erasing our history in the name of development means erasing economic opportunity, erasing culture, erasing places where small businesses exist, erasing cultural tourism, erasing places where our workforce lives, erasing our historic structures means going to the very heart of what's important to Miami Beach, but to so many other communities around the state of Florida. And we're out there, we're delivering that message alongside such important partners like Melissa from the Florida Trust and Historic Preservation. It's such a strong ally. But the biggest allies are all of you, the voices of this community that are emailing state representatives, are emailing legislators, all of you that showed up at the delegation meeting. Our voices are being heard. And that's the important thing. Just think about what we were able to accomplish last year. We were able to stand up against some of the most well-funded, the strongest, powerful forces in the state to stop a bill. And we continued that advocacy. Now the recession is ongoing, but before that, during the year, last year, leading up, we kept on reaching out to legislators, and we kept on speaking to the important lobbying groups and all that to make sure that they knew where Miami Beach stood and the threats that this could pose. And so now we're dealing with two different bills, and they'll talk about that later. But I just want to first of all, thank you, congratulate MDPL, and let you all know that we are committed to this fight because nothing could be clearer. Our history, our culture is at risk, and we won't let that be erased. And the commitment is there to keep on fighting for Miami Beach. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And I also wanted to mention that, when I went up to Tallahassee to fight for MDPL to solve some of those bills and work with others, that Commissioner Fernandez was there. He was an amazing resource. He was running the halls of the city capitol, and I was running into him, and he was giving great ideas. And so we're very lucky to have Commissioner, and now we have Tanya, I know, is very interested, as well as really all of the commissioners and mayor. We're so grateful for their support. And now I wanted to also talk about another group that is the focus of today's lecture, and that is the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation. I didn't know as much about them before last session, But when the bills were filed in Tallahassee, we went to them because they are really the state level advocacy group. You know, Miami Design Preservation League, we're mostly Miami Beach. Sometimes we go beyond. And then we have the Florida Trust, who is our partner in Tallahassee. And, you know, we have a great facility here, and it's amazing, owned by the city, managed by us for many years. But I also love the Florida Trust facility. I hope you'll all visit. It's actually in Tallahassee in a Queen Anne Victorian mansion. So it was kind of a nice place for me to set up my office while I was there. And MDPL is so honored with their increased funding to be able to support the Florida Trust at a greater level than ever before. We look forward to continuing that through the assistance and support of our membership. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Melissa Wyllie, who is CEO and President of the Trust. And she works with her board of 23 members. She'll really ensure that architectural, historical, and archaeological importance of the state of Florida. They also organize a series called the Advocacy Preservation Days, which I'll be going up to along with their board chair and another board member shortly after this festival. And so if you're not a member of Florida Trust, please be sure to join. We have to make sure all of our local and statewide organizations are really strong as we come up against probably the biggest threat since 1979. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Melissa.
Thank you, sir. Can y'all hear me okay? I didn't mess up the mic, did I? I found myself touching my face and I knew I shouldn't have. You'll see my name here, Melissa Wyllie. That's me. And then it says Mike Cosden, board president. He's stuck in traffic right now, but he is on his way. It's a very Miami story. So we're going to get started without him. And then when he comes, our goal is to make him feel as uncomfortable as possible. We want to do maybe a round of applause. I don't know, but we're going to definitely harass him a little bit. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about our priorities and overview of who we are, the Florida Trust, and our current work and our mission as a nonprofit. Then we're going to do a deeper dive into the advocacy focus that we're looking at this year. We're going to talk about our communications and our communication strategies to accomplish that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the power and importance of collaboration. So to get started, a lot of times when I talk to groups, there are different backgrounds, there's different levels of understanding of what historic preservation is, and maybe even there's different understandings of if historic preservation is important for their communities or if they think it's important for themselves. So I always like to start by talking about why do we protect historic places? What's the point? And there's no better way for me to start that conversation than by sharing my story of how I got started with historic preservation and what the point is really for me. So I was born in Clearwater, Florida, and so on the other coast, but still Florida. And I was born in the same hospital that my dad was born in. That's me and my dad down there at the bottom. And my daughter was born in the same hospital as we were. So we really have this strong family connection to Clearwater. And the picture on the top left over there is kind of a retro postcard from Clearwater Beach. If anybody has been to Clearwater Beach lately, it is not what it looks like over there anymore. I just ran a half marathon a couple months ago over there, and it does not look like that. We've developed quite a bit in Clearwater Beach. And then this down here is just a current picture of a view from Clearwater Bay. And that is the house that my dad grew up in. And so I'm the person on the dinghy there to the left, and then my cousin, and then my sister. But this house was a huge part of our growing up and my dad's growing up. It's in the Druid Hills subdivision. It's a National Register district. I didn't know it at the time what any of those things meant. But for my family, you know, this was their home and our home, and it had lots of our shared history, our shared memories in that space. When my dad was young, he was digging in the yard, and they found an arsenal from the Civil War. And because, you know, you're right there on the water, right, kind of there, that would have been a key point when there is a blockade for goods during the Civil War. So the history goes back so far. No real one person owns that history, but our family's experience and my beginning with preservation came when that building was demolished after my grandmother died. My grandfather didn't handle it well and sold the building, and it was immediately demolished. So for our family, it was almost like another death. They lost two things back to back. And that is where I was when I learned that our built environment shares our stories in very important, meaningful ways. And when they are lost, your ability to connect with those stories in the same way are lost as well. So that is also the same building there. But that is my preservation story. That's the beginning of when I realized that preservation really is a huge part, I think, of our shared human history and our shared stories. So it's a little hard to read this maybe from the back, but we just recently did a historic preservation toolkit, and we asked a lot of people, why do you preserve? Why are we doing this? And some of our responses we got back are protecting cultural identity and memories, preserving architectural legacies, supporting our neighborhoods, strengthening civic pride, capitalizing on existing assets, avoiding loss of important places, learning from the past, strengthening the economy. The list goes on and on. And I wanted to share two stories from Tampa that is also, I think, an example of why we preserve historic places. The building on the far right is the Laura Jackson boarding house in Tampa. It was in a historically African-American community. Most of it has been demolished now. And during urban renewal, entire blocks of that area were demolished. And now it is really the only piece that is left of that was that community and that neighborhood in that Tampa area. So you have that African-American story that exists only because that building is left. I mean, the story is still there, but the built environment, that's all that's there. Then you have the J.C. Newman Cigar Factory in Ybor City. This was a building that, is part of a tremendously vibrant and economically important cigar rolling industry in Florida and in Tampa. And it is now the only building that is left that actually makes and manufactures cigars left in Florida. So it's very important those buildings remain to tell those stories. So, in just another way for us to kind of level set and be on the same page is, how do we define historic preservation? I have talked to a lot of people, and I have never heard the same definition for what historic preservation is. So I don't know if anybody feels brave enough. I kind of keep a list, but if anybody feels brave enough to share their definition of historic preservation, I would love to hear it in the group. I'll throw out some to get it started. I was in Jacksonville recently, and someone said, it is the stories of my ancestors. And then another person said, my house is 120 years old. Imagine the stories that it could tell. And then I was in an event in Tallahassee the week before that, and people said, it is what keeps our community looking like every other community. So would anybody add to that? Any brilliant ideas? Yes, sir.
Preserving our built history.
I like it. Any other ones? Preserving our built history.
Way to stick it to greedy developers.
Oh, he said a way to stick it to greedy developers. Yes, sir.
We can remember how people lived.
That's a huge one. How we can remember how people lived.
Keeping a part of our young country alive. So big is to know what was here in America.
Yeah, absolutely.
Preserving memories and telling the stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
Helping us to understand the people we are.
Yes, that's a good point too. It helps us to understand who we are now. I love your point because, as Daniel mentioned, we have this 1910 Queen Anne Victorian, that Florida Trust House. Rick knows it well. And so when we have kids come to the house for tours, we say to them, imagine a world where there's no air conditioning and there's also not a television. How is your life different? How do you interact with the space differently? And then we start talking about, high ceilings and all these windows and big porches and doors where you can open the front, you can open the back, and the house breathes. And they're like, oh, there used to be a world where you interacted with the community outside. But what I love about all of these definitions is they involve the future. We're doing this now for the future. And also it's a piece of a community. We're not just preserving a building for it to exist under glass somewhere in its perfect perfect state, but we're doing it to be a part of a community. And I think that it's something that really resonates with a lot of us. So here are some of those examples that I mentioned. I think that there's some great ones. When our preservation toolkit is put out on our new website that's coming up soon, we'll share these. But I like to think how there are so many different ways of defining historic preservation, which means there's a lot of room in the preservation movement. And you'll notice nobody said, I believe historic preservation is about dictating to people what color they paint their house, which is what a lot of people think. All right, I wanted to share a preservation win, and this is when we're going to start segueing over into advocacy as well. Because in the win of this story, you're going to see how they have utilized policies and funding that exists through advocacy work. So this is the Mount Olive AME Church in Jacksonville. Has anybody been here or seen it? It's in East Jacksonville. It is a beautiful, beautiful building. The photo does not do it justice. There's these beautiful stained glass windows. It's in East Jacksonville. It is in a historically African-American community. It was built in 1922, but the congregation dates back to, I want to say, 1890. So this is a tremendously important part of their neighborhood. And it's an important part both spiritually, because it's a church, but also because it was really the heart of the civil rights movement for this community in Jacksonville. So you have A.L. Lewis, who was the first African-American millionaire in the state of Florida. This was his home church. His name is actually on one of these stained glass windows in here, and it's really, really beautiful. It was designed by an African-American architect. It was a tremendously beautiful, beautiful church. Here you can see the sanctuary. You can get a feel for the scale of this space. You walk in here and you can feel that this is a place where people would go to commune with something beyond themselves. It is a very powerful space. But the reality also of this space is that since it was built in 1922, a lot has changed in our urban cores throughout the United States. The demographics of the neighborhood have changed. People have moved out. The congregation is no longer thriving because around the United States, church congregations, they have dwindled in size. So the funds that are going to this church are not where they used to be. So you no longer, when you go to worship at Mount Olive AME Church, go through this beautiful grand stairway into this beautiful sanctuary. You go around the back and you enter into the basement where the Sunday school rooms were. That is now where they do their services, because it costs too much money to heat or to cool this beautiful giant space. So this is the sort of reality that this beautiful building kind of lives in right now. And here is one of our stained glass windows, and here is some damage that we can see here on the interior of the building. Because unfortunately, when you don't have enough money to heat or cool your sanctuary, you also don't have enough money to do really important maintenance on the building. And maybe your roof goes too long, and then it starts to have some water intrusion issues, and then maybe that water intrusion goes all the way, as you can see here, through the sanctuary into the basement, where they are now holding their services on Sunday, and also where the records for this 100-plus-year-old church exist. So you start to have an even bigger problem. But this is also where our success story piece comes in, because so far it seems a little like a downer, but here's where we're going to start feeling some success stories. So this building was listed on the Florida Trust 11 to Save. That is our list of the most endangered historic places in the state, as nominated by the people of Florida. The Miami Stadium. Almost called it the boat stadium, and that would have been terrible.
Thank you.
That was also on our list, as well as the National Trust list a few years ago. So it really is a tool for advocacy and education throughout the state. But now we also have a grant fund that is available for our 11 to Save locations. So we were able to give them in 2023 a grant to help immediately repair, temporarily, but to repair where the water is coming into the building. So the water can at least stop and their records downstairs can be safe and they can have their services downstairs still. The thing about our Let's Save grant is because we recognize that sometimes with grants, those matches can be really troublesome and difficult for some communities, like churches that are struggling, there is no match for these grants. They just get the money and they get to do immediately whatever they need to do with it right away. So we're very proud of that resource. But advocacy at the federal level, back in the 60s, created the National Historic Preservation Act, which allows for there to be funding for state historic preservation offices, which in Florida provides grants. So they could apply for a grant to also help for the funding of the restoration of their building. It also provides the National Park Service the opportunity to provide grants as well, which they have applied for to help to restore their windows. So there's a lot of funds that they could get through preservation advocacy work that has happened already, both at mostly at the federal level is where all these funds are coming from that we're talking about now. Additionally, they've been very savvy in Jacksonville about proactive ways that they can preserve their community. So you have East Jacksonville now is a National Register district, which can allow you to get some tax credits or other nice funding opportunities. It is also a new Main Street community, which helps with education, and it also helps with funding. And then if you do get that grant that I mentioned from the Division of Historical Resources, if you're in a Main Street, you don't have to do that match. So this church is an example of preservation need, a really important place that has a very important story, but also about how the advocacy work that we have done as preservationists at the federal, state, and local level can make a real difference on the ground in the preserving of our historic places. So just real quick, I think you guys are getting a little bit of a feel for who the Florida Trust is, but we're Florida's statewide nonprofit that works to protect our history and heritage. And that is everything from, as we mentioned, archaeological sites to mid-century modern buildings throughout the state. So it is a huge mission that we are working towards, but we are very passionate. We have the absolute best board of directors you can imagine helping to set that strategy. We are headquartered in Tallahassee, as you heard, and the reason we are headquartered in Tallahassee, I think, is so that we can advocate all the time. And that is a huge part of what we do to accomplish our mission. We have 4 key things that we work on. One of them is advocacy, one is education, one is actually historic property stewardship, doing the work of preservation, and the other is connecting with preservationists from around the state to make sure they have the information they need to do their work, because most of preservation is local. So anything that we can do to help make that scalable and to share information and resources with folks around the state, we want to do that. Here are some talking points that might be helpful for you in your work talking to local elected officials and lawmakers, the impacts of historic preservation. So have you guys seen any of the numbers around the economic impact of historic preservation? Well, here you go. This is a look. I'm looking to see the year. It was 2010. And we're looking and working to get these numbers updated in Florida. I know it is on our radar and something we're working on. But in 2010, you could attribute 123,000 jobs just in Florida to historic preservation. In that year, you had 120 million of federal historic tax credit incentives. So these are incentives that are through the federal government that are brought into preservation work in Florida. Then you have the rehabilitation of historic property, that's 13 billion. And then the heritage tourism piece, as we know here in Miami, is absolutely huge. And it was 63 million individuals who visited a historic place in Florida. And I'm sure we can see that those numbers are going to be going up and up. So that's kind of the foundation for what we're going to consider as we talk about our advocacy efforts for this year. This was our advocacy last year, and if it looks like fun, we would love to have you join us. We'll talk about that in more detail towards the end of the presentation. But a big part of what we're trying to do is to engage with lawmakers and staff, which is also really important. Not just on our 3 this year, last year it was 4 legislative priorities, but also so that they have an understanding of really what historic preservation is. So a very, very condensed version of what I've talked about already. And we like to tell them about the historic places and historic resources in their communities. When we start talking about the historic preservation grants, we tell them there are 3 grants in your community. So when it comes time to fund this, just keep in mind this will be in your community and will be benefiting them. You see Daniel right here. He was with us.
There.
Oh, was he? Oh, yeah. He really was. It's because he's so tall. I was there too. You just can't tell. So I don't know how many of you are here representing a nonprofit other than you in the back? You are not. You are? Okay. So I think a lot of what sometimes when we talk about meeting with lawmakers, if you are from a nonprofit perspective, the Florida Trust is a 501c3 charitable nonprofit. Sometimes people think that you cannot lobby or advocate with lawmakers if you're a nonprofit. And that is not true. There are limits that the IRS has imposed, but it is, depending on your mission, it would be pretty unlikely that you would hit that threshold and that criteria. You would definitely need to look at it for your own organization, but you can absolutely do it up to a certain limit. And then there are all other kind of workarounds. You can work with your accountant too, different forms you can fill out to make it work, but just don't feel like just because you're with a nonprofit, you can't go talk to a lawmaker. We even have employees for the state or the federal government, and they will say, I'm going to go meet with this lawmaker, and I'm not going to tell them what to do, but I can answer questions. So don't feel like you can't have these conversations. But was there a question? You can interrupt me anytime if there is a question. So you have general advocacy. So these are just things that you can go talk to a lawmaker about. You might just be talking about preservation in general. But when you get down to the actual work of lobbying, that is when you are asking for a particular outcome or asking for support or non-support of a particular bill or issue. So I just want to spend a little time touching on that because I know a lot of times nonprofits do feel like they're pigeonholed in there and they can't do this work, but I would say there's a very good chance that you can. So wherever you are, you can be a part of the advocacy process for your community or just individually. If you are working with like Miami Design Preservation League, you can be engaged with the role that they're playing. But overall, the process is you set a strategy. You work to build your relationships to accomplish that strategy. You determine who the stakeholders are that you need to engage with, and you determine what communication platforms you're going to need to do that work. And then finally, you do the work and then see how that went and then kind of change your strategy as needed from there. So we have a couple case studies of going through this process that I will share with you as we go further. Daniel, do you say 10 minutes or 5 minutes?
You got about 10 more.
Okay, good. 10 plus questions? Okay, we're golden. I'm sorry I keep making that noise. Should I move less?
Here we go. I got to keep it.
Why did nobody tell me? Is that better? What in the world, you guys? You could have saved yourself so much pain. Well, okay, I'm sorry, guys. Will you remind me to put that back in?
Yes.
Okay. So, real quick, talking about what our preservation strategy, or advocacy preservation strategy was in 2023, we had 4 main focus areas. And one of them that we're very excited about was the creation of the Abandoned Cemetery Office within the Division of Historical Resources. This sprang from work that had been done for several years with the African American Cemetery Task Force that the state appointed, which was in itself the result of, unfortunately, the realization in communities throughout the state that historically African American cemeteries had been A, forgotten, or B, paved over, or C, built on top of. So this was something that the state task force, which had folks that were appointed by the governor that sat on the task force, tried to determine a way out of that, a way to thoughtfully remedy that situation. So the creation of the Abandoned Cemetery Office in the Division of Historical Resources is going to have 3 new staff members that are going to work to record and interact with cemeteries around the state to help mitigate these issues. And it also included funding for the African American Cemetery Grant Program. And I believe the first round of applications for that grant have already been submitted. So I hope that we will start getting those funds out into communities soon. So there was a bill in the House, there was a bill in the Senate. The Florida Trust, along with other organizations, were very central in being in those committee hearings of both chambers and really supporting that throughout the process last year. We also worked with the bill that Commissioner Fernandez mentioned last year, the unsafe structures. We worked with great partners very diligently to get that not passed. And then I'm very excited to announce that for the second year in a row, we had full funding of the Division of Historical Resources Preservation Grants. So that was a big win for us. And then finally, we did try to get that state historic tax credit passed last year, and we just missed being included in the tax package. So, but 3 out of 4 preservation goals we did meet. So that's not bad. So this is a look at some of the materials that we created. So when you think about, your stakeholder group for this, it was lawmakers. So our communication medium was this book that we've did. Each one of the potential grant projects have their own pictures and a quick overview of what the need and the project scope is. So when we would go meet with lawmakers and ask them to fund the project, these would be the books that we would have flagged with the projects in their districts that would benefit. So we could communicate with them on sort of their level. Oh, wait, hold on, I'm sorry. I'm not going backwards, am I? Is it possible to go backwards, or am I just continually going forward now? Whoa, I broke it. Yeah, I went back. I was trying to go backward. Oh gosh, I figured it out. Okay, I just wanted to point out that fully funding these grants for fiscal year 24, so this year, was $8.5 million. So that was a pretty good number to go directly to brick and mortar projects throughout the state. I don't know if it was worth me going back for that point. Hopefully it was. So here's an overview of our priorities for this year. So now we're talking about 2024. We are again working to establish a state historic tax credit. And we learned from our strategic approach from last year. We kind of saw some of the weak points in our strategy. So this year we asked the Department of State to help us maybe potentially run this as a agency bill. And we're very grateful that they said that they would do this. So this is being run this year. The legislation is being run as an agency bill through the Department of State. Did you have a question?
Yes, they do. How would that work? Because we don't have a state income tax.
Well, I'm glad you asked. We do not have a state income tax, but we are modeling ours on Texas because Texas does have a historic tax credit. They do not have an income tax. So ours would go against the franchise tax and the insurance premium tax. And then if you did not have a tax liability in either of those brackets, but you had an eligible project and you got a credit, it would also have a secondary market. So it could be traded. So you would still get a benefit from it. So we're going to talk about the Unsafe Structures Act. I think probably we know a little bit about that in this room. Hey guys, it's Mike.
I don't like
That was so impromptu. Did you want to talk about this one?
Sure. I have a microphone, but I can.
No, you do.
Okay.
It's right over here. Mike.
Sure, you a Stockholm? Like, oh, perfect. How is progress?
Right, there you go. You missed me having to take off my earring.
Oh, I'm so sorry that I missed that. How are y'all doing? I'm sure someone else tells traffic. You all know the answer to that already. I've learned everything for us. Google Maps again. I'm sure you all already know that. What's the problem?
Here's the clicker.
Waves? Yeah. Next time.
You didn't use Waze?
No, I don't. Embarrassing. But I'm Mike Cosden, the current board president at the Florida Trust. Very excited to have this opportunity to talk to you all here. And it looks like when you're talking about our advocacy priorities, have you already hit this?
Only the first one.
Okay, great. So we already recapped kind of where we were last year. Always mentioned after the tax credit, two of the priorities are to address some information for historic preservation that are in the Unsafe Structures Act, which some of you may be familiar with. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that next, and we can chat after the talk more in detail if anyone wants to. And then grant funding is an annual priority for us to advocate for the state to fully fund our historic preservation special category grant list, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So those are our three main legislative advocacies. Do you want to talk about the tax credit? Talk about the grant?
You see, because you were late, you didn't get the Britney Spears lovely reminder. So I don't even need that. So we talked a little bit about the historic tax credit and what tax it would go against. Here is All right. So it's being run as an agency bill. So it has the support of the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State has helped us to go talk to the governor to really do a great job being an ambassador for talking about the value of this. And I do think that a lot of that is because of the work that we had done in years past. So going back to the building relationship piece, building the relationship with the Secretary of State and helping him to see the value of historic preservation. So it is an agency bill, but it also is being run in both chambers with a sponsor in the Senate and in the House. So in the Senate, it is Senator Nick DeCigli from Clearwater area, my hometown. So he is running Senate Bill 1166. And the first committee stop is the Commerce and Tourism Committee. And that is actually, as of last night, been agended. So that committee meeting will be Tuesday morning at, I want to say 1 p.m. But if you're on the Florida Trust advocacy distribution list, which I hope you all are, then you will get an advocacy alert this afternoon about that, all these details, so don't feel like you have to memorize it. In the House, our sponsor is Representative Webster Barnaby. And the first stop there is going to be Community Affairs. I think that might be the second stop. I think the first stop might be Ways and Means. That might be a little bit of a miscommunication, but it has not been agended yet. So when you get the advocacy alert, our call to action is going to be to please reach out to the chair of all of the committees that it has been assigned to and ask them to put it on the agenda at the appropriate time.
Yeah, can I just make a quick
Please.
comment as to why this is so important for Miami Beach. I've been involved in another project across the bay, which is the restoration.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Hey, come on and stand up.
Sure. I've been involved in another project across the bay, which is the restoration of the Miami Marine Stadium, which has a $60 million project cost. We have a proposal from a syndicator for a national historic tax credit, which is $10 million upfront net of soft costs. The state tax credit would match that. Another $10 million upfront net of soft costs, which makes a project which was sort of hard, all of a sudden kind of feasible for the city of Miami. You should know 37 other states have a state historic tax credit. But Miami Beach, I think, would probably stand to benefit from this maybe more than any other community in Florida. I spoke to Deputy Tax. There are 2,000 properties in Miami Beach which are in National Register of Historic Districts. Some are contributing, some are not contributing. It's not necessarily a simple process. A project has to be on the National Register of Historic Places, and the improvements that you make have to be acceptable to the government and have the building up. You can't use it for a single family house. But this is a type of thing which could really turbocharge historic preservation in our area. And for once, we're not fighting. We're not fighting developers. Developers want this. So this is something I hope the city of Miami Beach can get behind, because I hope we're all focused on the bad stuff that is happening. Something potentially very good that can happen here. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very great. Thank you for the great point. And to that point, the Florida State Historic Tax Credit would automatically marry with the Federal Historic Tax Credit. So it would be one application process, and you would automatically be eligible for the 20% federal, and then also the 30 or 20. 30 if you're in a main street, 20 if you're not in a main street. But yes, it would automatically pair together. So up to 50. So, that was tax credit. I'm just going to mention very briefly, because I know we're trying to be very concise here towards the end, but we created last year a tax credit alliance. So this is a group of professionals in Florida, but also throughout the nation that have done work on tax credit projects. So you have the sort of tax credit syndicators, and then you also have developers that have been instrumental in utilizing it to make projects work. So they have joined Florida Trust at the Florida Tax Credit Alliance level, and then they kind of serve us as an advisory group to help us with their experience. So we just wanted to mention that real quick. Is this me too?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And then, all right, so our next priority is to, again, keep the Unsafe Structures Act from passing in Florida this year, or at the very least, to amend the language so that it is more helpful for historic president, or maybe less detrimental. Are you going to do it? Am I going to do it? Okay. less detrimental for Florida preservation. Oop, that's all there. Okay. Oh, the back button. So I think everyone's pretty familiar with the language, but and I have it here so I can read it out or I could answer questions afterwards. But pretty much it removes local government's abilities to keep demolitions from happening in certain cases, and then also from saying what can be built back in those cases. And that's a very, very simplified version of the language of the bills. It's very similar to last year's bills. The language in the House version would allow exemptions for individually listed National Register buildings, but also National Register districts. So that would be a better outcome for us. But the Senate bill just has the individually listed National Register buildings, which is the same as the language from last year. So our first advocacy ask, which will be in the advocacy alert that goes out this afternoon, is going to be to reach out to the folks that are on the first committee for the Unsafe Structures Act. They're going to hear it first. I have it written down, but I can't remember. Is it Community Affairs? Community Affairs, thank you. Community Affairs, and that is going to be Tuesday at 11 a.m. So we're going to ask for the Senate language to more closely match the House language that would include the National Register districts. I also know that when we were working on this last year, we wanted to include also historic buildings that were locally listed and also those within a Main Street district. So that would kind of be a best case scenario, I think, amended language that we could see in this case. But we're going to work very hard with stakeholders around the state on this one. So we have a Zoom meeting on January 17th, so Wednesday, the day after these committee hearings, and we've invited stakeholders from around the state to come together. We have a Google Drive full of tools, sample resolutions, newspaper stories, media stories that have happened as a result of this work last year and also this year, talking points, all these kind of resources that we're going to launch at that call so that we can all be working in our own communities and meeting with our own locally elected officials. If your community has a lobbyist that they can get to mention it in their work as part of their strategy, engaging those folks as well. It's the very beginning of session. Session just began Wednesday. We're like day 4 or something. But we're very serious and focused on moving this one forward.
All right, and I'll touch quickly on grant funding. We hit on it already, but the Florida's relative position is the special category grants every year. There are, let's see, we've got 36 projects on this year's grant list with a price tag of almost $10 million. There's a map here that shows they're located all throughout the state. I'm sure some of you have applied for grants in the past or have been beneficiaries of the structures that have benefited from them. They're really key to historic preservation in Florida. So this is always one of our advocacy efforts, and we are working with our colleagues and our elected officials to make sure that this is included in appropriations and fully funded. Mm-hmm. It's about as concise as I can do that. And we'll just keep moving longer. I can touch on our conversations and outreach there just real briefly. These are some of the methods that we are using to make sure that our message of what historic preservation is and why it's important, which I'm sure Melissa has already impressed and many of you are already simpatico on right now. These are some of the ways that we do that. I'll just touch on a few. We're going to talk about collaborative coalition building in a moment, but collaborations have been really important for us. Of course, all these things you would think like social media, media alerts and events, things like that. During in person at committee hearings. And I understand that you can now appear virtually to signal your what's the right word here?
You can wave in support or not in support, but that's only in the Senate, I believe.
Understand.
You have to be there.
So they may do that virtual at least. That, right? And then, of course, like some of the awareness campaigns we talked about a little bit. Let's keep moving us along here. Do you want to touch on the collaborations?
So we already mentioned a little bit about the collaborative work that we did. Wrap it up. Daniel, are you standing up? Does that mean you wrap it up? Okay. So we worked with a wide variety of stakeholders to have, I think that is the success that we had was with the collaborations. So when we were up on the Hill, we saw lobbyists from St. Augustine and maybe Fort Myers. There was a lot of people working together on this. So our hope is that by trying to kind of be a space where everyone can get together, we can make sure we're all on message and we're asking for the same thing. Last year we did a good job, I think, of all having the same amended language request. So it wasn't like Daniel was asking for like XYZ and then I was asking for like M through G. There was consistency, which is very helpful, I think, for lawmakers. If they're hearing the same thing or if their staff is hearing the exact same thing, copy and paste, it's a little easier for them. So we want to make the process work as well as we can by serving as that sort of central place where we can connect together, communicate together, share stories, and ultimately, hopefully, work better together. Oh, can I just say one more thing? So on the advocacy alert, does anybody not get alerts? There was one that was sent yesterday. If you would like to come up to me afterwards and just give me your email address, I will take that. Or you could just go to floortrust.org and you could get on the list that way, or you can email me. Do we have a contact page?
At the end.
At the end, there's a contact page. We will get you on that list. But I think that is going to be a big way that we communicate. So don't let me forget to get that business card.
And I know you wanted to mention our relationship with the National Trust for Historic Preservation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So another of our collaborators that really helped, I think, last year was the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And they can do advocacy alerts, similar to what we do. But their membership in Florida, they have a good number of members in Florida. And there is some overlap with our members, but there definitely is some spaces where there are other people that are getting the message through them. So last year, they sent a advocacy alert out to all of the members in Florida, advising them to reach out to their lawmakers, warning them about the impact of the unsafe structures bill. So that was very helpful. And even for our members who do our advocacy alerts, I think that maybe getting the National Trust advocacy alert on top of that was like, now it's serious.
Becomes a drumbeat.
Yes, exactly. Repetition is so key. So we have again reached out to them. They're very aware of the Unsafe Structures Act. And I do believe that it's likely that they're going to support the tax credit with an advocacy alert and then also the unsafe structures. Maybe not like 6 of session, but maybe week 2 or 3. So here, we're going to do this one or was I? Some of the ways that we have worked with stakeholders to build relationships and to collaborate to get our strategic focus forward. We have the Tax Credit Alliance we mentioned to get the tax credit passed. We have the awesome folks at the Miami Design Preservation League that were so instrumental in the work against the Unsafe Structures Bill, the National Trust we mentioned, the Florida Main Street, the tax credit is actually called the Main Street Revitalization Act because part of what is so attractive about it for lawmakers is it's a 30% in Main Street districts credit because we recognize that in some of the rural corridor of Florida, some of our historic main streets in the central part of Florida, they need that extra incentive to make preservation work, to make that those dollars make sense. So we work very closely with the Main Street. We actually have a conference every year in partnership with the Florida Main Street and the Division of Historical Resources. It will be in Tallahassee this year in July. I hope you could join us for that. And then finally, for the work that we do with the grant funding we created with all these other folks, the Coalition for Florida's Historic Places. And the thought process there is also these people, there's some overlap in our membership, but not a whole ton. Not everybody is a member of all of these organizations. So if we can all have all of our membership reach out to their lawmakers and ask for funding, they can all still use that book that we created with the pictures and everything, but they get all their folks to do it, and then we get all of our folks to do it, and then you get that message out there repeated so many more times. Oh, good.
So after our presentation today, if you're fired up to get involved, here are some things that you can do as a next. First, staying informed, you can become a member of the Florida Trust. We can't give a presentation without giving a plug for membership.
Daniel did one too.
Nice, okay. Sign for the advocacy updates, which we talked about, and the advocacy distribution list. And then attend our Preservation on Main Street conference that I have this year. You can engage by planning to host an in-district meeting with lawmakers. Super helpful to stay in contact and know your local lawmakers so that you have a beer when there's a time to need it, like right now, perhaps. Engage with advocacy, ask them to send out, and you can look at our preservation toolkit, which is a resource. Really excited to have created using a special grant. And it's basically a toolkit for anyone who's interested in preservation from the ground up. For someone that's a preservation advocate or maybe just a community member that cares about a local historic house or building. It's a great way for them to get started, and that will be available very soon. You can become a member of the Florida Tax Credit Alliance. You know, assist with this advocacy ask and engage with other organizations who can help. And I think that's a really important one, and one that we've done really well the last few years is to build that coalition of organizations. And a couple ways to volunteer. You can come to Tallahassee for Legislative Day and Legislative Reception that's coming up here in 2 weeks. And then also Washington, D.C., there are opportunities to talk to federal lawmakers about the value of preservation. And of course, if you're using our website to stay tuned on other ways to volunteer, there are pretty regular volunteer efforts throughout the state.
And I just want to underline this real quick. I know we've spent most of our time talking about, you know, Florida strategic advocacy priorities, but there are some big things going on at the federal level too. So just in a nutshell, the Historic Preservation Fund, the congressional authorization for that has expired. So that's not great. We need to work on that. We're constantly asking for increases in the Historic Preservation Fund. It was set about 40 years ago at 150 million. That's not 150 million per state. That's 150 million total. And 150 million doesn't go as far as it used to, like 40 years ago. So we need to continue working on that because those are the funds that fund these grants and they fund our state historic preservation office. So it's important at the federal level that those tools are available for us to be able to do our work. And then of course, you know, it wasn't too many years ago when the federal historic tax credit was almost lost. So it is only through the diligent work of advocacy efforts at the federal level that we retained that, and it is still in the tax code. So if anybody's interested in doing any of that work in DC, we are the state coordinator for the Preservation Action Conference that's going on in DC. So please talk to me about that. Are we good for questions?
Yep, we are.
Does anybody have any questions? I think we may have run a little bit long, and so I apologize. Yes, sir.
How do you get Gen Z and millennial generation to historical preservation?
Maybe I'm just lucky, but the folks that we interact with and engage with are really interested in it, actually. I know that we found with millennials especially that the character and sense of place that are inherent in historic areas are very important to them. Like they're sort of going towards those places. And then with COVID, you have people who are working in different places than they're living necessarily. So you can see where you may be in a historic Main Street living, like in DeLand's, Florida, where we had our conference a few years ago, but maybe your office is in technically Orlando. So, you know, there's starting to be that nice impact, but there's a lot of younger people that are looking at some of those Main Street areas because they're more affordable and they have that character that they're looking for. A lot of people, I think, and maybe it's just the rose-colored lenses that I'm looking at the world through, really appreciate our historic assets. And, you know, preservation is a nonpartisan issue. So, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. Mike has got, you know, a new website going. If you want, that'll engage the younger folks.
We don't have an app or anything exciting like that, but
We should get an app.
but yeah, we do have a new website that we'll be launching in the next couple of weeks here. We're excited about that. A new way to more clearly and concisely get across our message and share resources. So I think that's great.
This time.
Where is that map of Florida that shows all the historic preservation candidates?
It's going to be, it probably already is on our website. There's a Take Action tab on the far right-hand side, and there's one that is for grants. And that map was the fiscal year 2025 grants. So that's the grants that they're funding this time around. So it will be on our website. Mm-hmm.
And just while we take in one more question here, I do want to mention Melissa's contact information is
Why didn't you put your contact information?
a little bit hard to read. So if anybody wants to jot that down and take a picture, that is a way to get in touch after the presentation.
Yes, ma'am.
Question on the map, you talked earlier from the back. I didn't see Tampa, and maybe I missed that.
The grants. Was that the map of grant?
Yeah, if it was the back button. Yeah, it's not as easy as you think.
I see. Okay,
that
okay.
one. So if it's the map I'm thinking of, that was a map of the fiscal year 25 preservation grants. So those are just the people who are in the pipeline to get the grants. But But you're absolutely right. If we were thinking about federal historic tax credits, cities that have utilized that in the state of Florida, Miami, Tampa, Jacksonville, a few in Pensacola, those are the big utilization centers for the tax credit. But overall, the tax credit is underutilized in Florida because we just have the federal. So when we get them together, paired together, I think we're going to start to see a lot more relevance for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions before? Oh yeah, here's the map. That's the grants map. Okay, well, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.